Before time began, before the first stars flickered to life, there was only the void, an endless, silent expanse where nothing stirred, except for one. Eru Ilúvatar, the one, the source of all things, stood alone in that infinite darkness, his thoughts like embers waiting to ignite creation itself. Can you imagine it? The weight of that moment, the sheer possibility humming in the emptiness. Tonight, we're stepping into that very instant, the breath before the universe began. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from right now? Is it late where you are? The world outside your window hushed and still? Or perhaps dawn is just brushing the horizon? Let us know in the comments below, because this isn't just a story we're sharing. It's a journey we're taking together, across time and imagination. Now, close your eyes for a moment and picture it. The void, vast and untouched, like a canvas stretched beyond eternity. Then, a whisper, a single thought from Ilúvatar, radiant as a newborn star, weaving through the nothingness. This was no ordinary idea. It was a song, the first melody, trembling with the power to shape worlds. And from that song, the Ainur, his divine children, awoke. They gathered around him, their voices eager, their hearts alight with the promise of creation. But here's the thing about songs, they can hold beauty and shadow in the same breath. Even as the harmony swelled, something else stirred in the depths of the void, something that didn't quite fit the melody. This is where our story truly begins, with a single note, a single choice that would echo across all of existence. What unfolds isn't just the tale of Arda's birth, but a symphony of light and darkness, of loyalty and rebellion, of themes so vast they'll make your soul ache. Because tonight, we're not just listeners, we're witnesses to the moment everything changed. So settle in, let the world around you fade, and prepare to step into the heart of the void itself. The music is about to begin, and oh, what a song it will be. Eru's voice, warm as the first dawn yet vast as the cosmos itself, called out to the Ainur, not as a command, but as an invitation. Come, it seemed to say, lend me your voices, for together we shall sing into being something beyond even my own imagining. And one by one, they awoke to his call, each a spark of his infinite thought given form. Can you hear it? That first collective breath they took, the hush before the music began. Some stood in awe, their newfound consciousness trembling like leaves in a gentle wind. How could they, mere fragments of the one's mind, dare to shape creation? Others, like mighty Manwë, whose spirit soared on winds yet unformed, stepped forward without fear, their hearts already humming with the promise of the melody. Then Ilúvatar raised his hand, and the void trembled, not with force, but with possibility. He sang a single note clear and boundless, and in that instant, the Ainur understood. This was no mere song, it was a living thing, a tapestry where every thread was a choice, every harmony a destiny. As their voices joined his, something miraculous happened. The darkness began to ripple. Stars flickered into being not as distant lights, but as echoes of their shared music. Rivers of silver and gold, like liquid starlight, wove through the emptiness, and the first mountains rose not from rock, but from the deep, resonant tones of Allah's voice. Yet even in this symphony of light, shadows danced. Melkor, greatest of the Ainur, felt the music differently. Where others heard unity, he heard constraint. His voice, powerful as a storm, began to twist the melody, not in discord, not at first, but in a restless variation, a darker harmony, one that whispered of dominion rather than collaboration. And here's the haunting beauty of it all. Eru allowed it, for in his wisdom, he knew even shadows had their place in the grand design. The music swelled, now layered with complexity, joy and sorrow, creation and defiance, all spinning together into the very soul of the world to come. So tell me, when you think of creation, do you picture it as a flawless hymn, or perhaps like the Ainur, you sense the truth, that every great making is born from both harmony and tension, from voices that rise together and those that dare to sing alone? Close your eyes again. Listen, can you hear it? The moment the universe held its breath, balanced between a single note and everything that would follow. Melker's voice, once as rich and resonant as the others, began to shift, subtly at first, like a single thread of smoke curling through clear air. His melody, instead of weaving into the grand design, pulled against it, twisting the harmony into something sharper, colder. Where the Ainur sang of towering forests and sunlit seas, his notes carried the weight of jagged peaks and churning tempests. Not all discord is ugly. Of course, sometimes it's simply difference, a new color in the tapestry. But this was different. This was hunger, a desire not to contribute, but to conquer. Can you feel it? That moment when the music changed, the other Ainur hesitated, their voices faltering as shadows threaded through the light. Man, Wes soaring tones, once boundless as the sky, grew quieter, as if mourning the fracture. All his deep, steadfast rhythms stuttered, his hammer strokes against the anvil of creation, now uneven. Even Varda, whose laughter had spun the first stars into being, paused, her light dimming as she turned toward the growing dissonance. Yet Eru did not silence Melker. He did not strike him down or correct the wayward notes. Instead, he listened, because here's the secret buried in the heart of creation. Even rebellion can be a kind of offering. Melker's defiance wasn't merely destruction. It was a question. What if the song were mine to command? His pride, his restless ambition, became a counterpoint to the unity of the others, a dark mirror held up to their collaboration. And in that tension, something unexpected emerged: depth. The music was no longer a single, radiant chord, but a living, breathing thing, layered with struggle and meaning. Mountains didn't just rise, they shattered and reformed, their roots gripping the earth with defiance. Oceans didn't merely flow, they raged against their shores, then stilled into glassy whispers. The world taking shape was no longer a perfect dream, but something richer, realer. Still, the cost of that depth was pain. The Ainur who had sung so joyfully now trembled at the fractures in their once seamless harmony. Some, like gentle Nienna, let their voices dissolve into sorrow, their tears becoming the first rains that would one day soothe the wounds of the world. Others, like Tulkas the Valiant, met Melker's discord with fire, their melodies clashing like swords in the dark. And through it all, Eru watched, his presence neither approving nor condemning, but encompassing. Because the greatest melodies aren't those without discord, they are the ones that make room for it, then transcend it. So tell me, when you hear a storm, do you cover your ears? Or do you listen, truly listen, to the way thunder gives meaning to the silence after? That's the gift Melker unwittingly brought to creation. Not ruin, but resonance. The darkness he wove into the music would one day make the light shine brighter, the peace feel sweeter, and though the Ainur did not yet understand, Eru's hands were still on the loom, guiding every thread, even the broken ones, into a pattern far greater than any of them could see. Then, as if the music itself had drawn breath, Eru's voice rose above the chaos, not in anger, not in rebuke, but with a deeper, richer theme. This new melody didn't erase Melkor's discord. It wove around it, through it, transforming rebellion into part of the pattern. The Ainur who had wavered now straightened, their voices finding strength in the certainty of that steady rhythm. Man, whose song, once hesitant, now soared like an eagle through storm clouds, while all his hammer strokes fell with renewed purpose, each strike forging not just mountains but foundations. Even Nienna's tears, once shed in sorrow, glistened like rivers carving valleys into the newborn earth. Light, true light, pierced the shadows for the first time. Not the faint glimmer of distant stars, but a radiance that seemed to pulse from the very heart of the music. Arda, her voice crystalline and bright, shaped it with her hands, scattering it across the heavens like seeds. Where it fell, the darkness recoiled, not vanquished but held at bay, and the first contours of Arda emerged from the void. Vast plains where the wind would one day whisper through grass, deep oceans that cradled the moon's reflection, and peaks so tall they seemed to brush the fabric of the sky. Yet for all its beauty, the world bore scars. Melkor's dissonance had seeped into the music like ink and water, staining the edges of creation. Cracks split the earth where his voice had been loudest, and in the north, a chill crept into the air, a warning of winters yet to come. But here's the wonder of it. Eru's new melody didn't ignore these flaws. It embraced them, turning fractures into fjords, bitterness into the salt of the sea. The Ainur, singing now with fierce devotion, understood this world wasn't meant to be perfect. It was meant to be alive, and so the music played on, a tapestry of light and shadow, of defiance and resilience. Somewhere in the chorus, Melker still sang, his voice a thorn in the harmony, but the others no longer faltered at its sound. They leaned into the tension, letting it temper their notes like steel in a forge. Because the greatest symphonies aren't those without struggle, they are the ones where struggle becomes part of the beauty. Close your eyes, listen, can you hear it? The moment the world held its breath, balanced between ruin and radiance, and chose to shine anyway. The moment the music faded into silence, the Ainur stepped forward, not as voices now, but as beings of flesh and flame, their very presence shaping the newborn world beneath their feet. Manwe, tallest among them, spread his arms wide, and the first true winds rushed forth from his fingertips, swirling through the empty skies like restless spirits. Where his breath touched the air, clouds gathered, heavy with the promise of rain, while his laughter sent gusts, dancing across the plains, teasing the first seeds of life yet to awaken. Beside him, Ulmo cast off his ethereal form, diving into the depths of the newborn seas. His body became the currents themselves, his voice the crash of waves against unseen shores, his will guiding rivers to carve their winding paths through stone. And then there was Ale, his hands calloused from the labor of creation, kneeling in the dark soil as if in prayer. With each strike of his hammer, mountains heaved themselves upward, their roots gripping the bones of the world, while veins of metal and crystal pulsed like living things beneath the surface. Yet for all their labor, shadows moved where the Valar were not looking. Melker had crossed into Arda unseen, his form wrapped in whispers and smoke. Where Manwes winds blew clean, he left behind pockets of stagnant air, thick with the scent of decay. Where Ulmo's waters ran clear, he stirred hidden whirlpools, their depths choked with silt. And in the quiet places between all his forges, his fingers traced cracks into the stone, subtle flaws that would one day split wide under pressure. The Valar felt his presence, a prickle at the edge of their thoughts, a dissonance humming beneath the world's skin. But to confront him outright would risk shattering the fragile balance they'd only just begun to build. So they worked with light and shadow, weaving resilience into the very fabric of Arda. Yavanna, her hair crowned with vines, sang over the barren fields, and where her voice trembled, shoots of green unfurled, their leaves trembling in the newborn sun. Nienna, ever sorrowful, washed the wounds Melkor had left with her tears, and though the scars remained, they softened, their edges blooming with unexpected beauty. Even the darkness had its purpose now. Forests grew denser where light was scarce. Creatures adapted to the cold, and the first stars Varda had kindled burned all the brighter against the encroaching night. But here's the truth that hummed beneath every hill and echoed in every wave. The world was never meant to be untouchable. Its strength lay not in perfection, but in its ability to endure. Every storm Manwë could not calm, every depth Ulmo could not purify, every fracture All could not mend. They were not failures, they were invitations. For one day, hands smaller than theirs would touch the earth, voices softer than theirs would rise in song, and the story of Arda would no longer belong to the Ainur alone. The world was waiting, and in the shadows, so was Melkor. The Valar looked upon the newborn world and saw not its flaws, but its potential. A garden waiting to be tended, a canvas yearning for color. And so they set to work, their hands shaping the wild lands into something more ordered, more alive. High in the north, Alla raised a pillar of stone, so vast it seemed to hold up the sky itself, and upon its peak, he placed Ilúvatar, a lamp of silver-blue flame that bathed the land in a light like moonbeams on snow. Far to the south, Varda kindled Ormel, its golden radiance spilling across the earth like liquid sun, warming the soil where Yavanna's first seeds had begun to stir. For the first time, Arda knew true day and night, not as opposing forces, but as two halves of a single breath. Under Ilúvan's glow, ferns unfurled their delicate fronds, their veins pulsing with chlorophyll as they drank in the cool light. Ormel's warmth coaxed vines to climb the pillars of the world, their blossoms bursting into hues no eye had yet seen: crimson, saffron, indigo, as if the earth itself were singing in color. Rivers, once aimless, now carved purposeful paths through the valleys, reflecting the lamp's twin lights like ribbons of molten metal. And in the shadows between, creatures stirred, the first butterflies, their wings still damp from the cocoon, testing the air with tentative flutters. Beetles armored in iridescent shells, clicking their approval of the world they'd inherited. The Valar rejoiced, their voices weaving through the groves and over the hills. Manwë's winds carried the scent of blooming citrus trees to Ulmo's seas, where fish leaped to taste the unfamiliar sweetness. Nienna, ever tender, brushed her fingers over the bark of an ancient oak, her tears watering its roots as she whispered blessings for the storms it would one day endure. Even Tolkas, usually restless, paused to kneel in a meadow, laughing as ladybugs crawled across his knuckles like living jewels. It was a time of innocence, of unspoiled wonder, a golden age before the concept of loss had ever taken root. But in the north, where Illuan's light grew thin and the air tasted of iron, Melkor watched. The lamp's brilliance was a thorn in his side, their radiance exposing the cracks in his dominion. He had woven shadows into the earth's foundations. Yes, but now, under that relentless glow, even his finest works seemed petty, fleeting. His fingers curled into fists as he observed the Valar's joy, their blind trust in the world they'd built. How could they not see? Perfection was an illusion, a fragile veneer, and he would be the one to shatter it. Gathering his strength, he turned to the creatures that had flocked to his darkness, twisted things, half-formed and hungry, their loyalty bought with promises of dominion. With a voice like grinding stone, he spun them a new dream, not of ruin, but of revolution. Why should light claim all the glory? He murmured, stroking the spines of a creature that might one day be called a dragon. Why should order go unchallenged? The earth, he argued, was meant to be wild, untamed, a realm where strength, not harmony, dictated the right to thrive. The Valar, tending their gardens and singing to the newborn stars, did not hear the whispers coiling through the northern wastes. They did not feel the tremor in the earth as Melkor's forces gathered, their claws sharpening against the bones of the world. For now, the lamps still burned, the flowers still bloomed, and the first birds, their feathers still sticky with dawn, took to the skies in dizzy spirals, their songs weaving into the music as if no discord had ever touched it. But high above, unnoticed, the stars flickered, not in warning, but in witness. The storm was coming, and the world, so young, so bright, would soon learn the price of light. Melkor's patience had worn thin. For ages, he had watched the Valar shape their perfect world beneath the twin lamps, their light exposing every shadow he had so carefully sown. But now the time for whispers was over. With a roar that split the silence like thunder, he surged forth from the northern wastes, his form swelling into a tempest of smoke and fury. His armies, creatures of jagged tooth and twisted limb, poured after him, their howls shaking the newborn mountains. The Valar, tending the gardens of Yavanna or walking the shores with Ulmo, turned too late. Illuan was the first to fall. Melkor's claws, dark as obsidian and sharp as betrayal, tore through the lamp's silver spire, sending cracks racing down its length. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath, then the structure collapsed, its light guttering like a dying star. The impact struck the earth with the force of a god's grief, splitting the land asunder. Continents heaved, their edges crumbling into the sea, while rivers reversed course, their waters boiling into mist. Ormel, standing defiant in the south, was next. Melkor wrenched it from its roots, hurling it westward in a fiery arc. Where it landed, the seas themselves caught flame, and the sky wept ashes for days unending. Darkness, thick and suffocating, swallowed Arda whole. The Valar staggered, their voices raw with disbelief. Man, was winds, once so sure, now screamed through the shattered valleys, carrying the stench of scorched earth. Varda's stars, though still bright, seemed suddenly distant, cold witnesses to the ruin below. Yavanna fell to her knees, her hands buried in soil that would no longer answer her song. And Melkor, he stood amid the wreckage, his laughter a poison in the air, and claimed it all. The jagged peaks, the smoking plains, the creatures that now cowered in his shadow, they were his. Not by creation, but by conquest. The Valar could have fought. Oh, they burned with the need to strike back, to tear the darkness apart with their bare hands. But the world was too fragile, its wounds too fresh. Another battle might reduce it to dust. So they did the unthinkable. They retreated. Gathering the last echoes of their light, they fled to the far west, beyond the reach of Melkor's fury. There, on the shores of a sea untouched by ruin, they knelt not in surrender, but in resolve. The symmetry of Arda was broken, yes, but broken things can still be remade. And so the first age ended not with a song, but with a silence deeper than the void itself. Yet if you listen closely, even now, you might hear it, the faint, stubborn rhythm of a hammer striking anvil in the west. Alle, ever the craftsman, had already begun to work. In the west, where the Valar had gathered their broken hope, Yavanna stood alone beneath the empty sky. Her hands, still streaked with soil from the ruined gardens of Arda, trembled not with sorrow, but with resolve. Closing her eyes, she reached deep into the memory of the music, past the discord and the darkness, to the moment when creation had been pure potential. And then she sang, not a lament, not a plea, but a hymn so vivid it seemed to draw the very air into its rhythm. The ground beneath her feet shuddered in reply. From the earth rose two saplings, slender as whispers at first, then swelling with impossible vigor. The first, Tulperion, stretched its branches toward the heavens, its leaves unfurling like silver glass, each one catching the faint starlight and multiplying it 1,000-fold. Dew gathered at their tips, falling in luminous droplets that illuminated the soil below. The second, Laurelin, coiled upward in a cascade of gold, its blossoms bursting open with a sound like chimes, each petal radiating warmth that banished the lingering chill of the fallen lamps. Together, their light wove a tapestry of dawn and dusk, of moonbeam and sunlight intertwined, a harmony the world had never known. Valinor, once a refuge of weary gods, became a living dream. The light of the two trees spilled across the white shores and marble cities like liquid grace, pooling in the courtyards where the Valar now walked with heads held high. Fruits hung heavy from Laurelin's boughs, their juice like liquid amber, while Tulperion's silver flowers perfumed the air with a scent that lingered in the lungs like a promise. Even the stones seemed to hum with contentment, their edges softened by centuries of that gentle radiance. The Elves, awakening far to the east under Varda's stars, would one day whisper of this place as the undying lands. But in those early years, it was simply home. Yet shadows have a way of clinging to even the brightest edges. Beyond the mountains that ringed Valinor, in the fissures where the light of the trees could not reach, Melkor paced. The radiance galled him, not because it was beautiful. He could admire beauty in his way, but because it was unearned. The Valar had not fought for this peace. They had simply willed it into being, as if their right to joy were divine law. His fingers curled around a shard of obsidian, its edges biting into his palm. Let them have their paradise. Let them grow fat on its bounty, blind to the cracks in their walls. And so he watched. He learned. He counted the hours when the tree's light waned, Tulperion dimming as Laurelin brightened, their rhythms as predictable as the Valar's trust. His spies, creatures of wing and claw, brought him tales of the growing complacency in Valinor, how the gates stood unguarded, how the songs of the Maiar had turned from vigilance to lullabies. Most delicious of all was the news of the Silmarils, Those 3 jewels Fëanor had crafted to capture the very light of the trees. Perfect, Melker thought, his smile a slit in the darkness. The Valar had built their sanctuary on a foundation of borrowed light, and foundations, as he well knew, could be shattered. High in the towers of Tanaquetil, Manwë stirred from his repose, a sudden chill threading through his thoughts. For a moment, he almost rose, almost called the Valar to counsel, but the light of Laurelin, warm through the window, lulled him back. Surely, after so many ages of peace, the shadow could not touch them here. Surely, the wind carried his doubt away, leaving only the scent of golden blossoms and the distant, ever-present hum of the trees. But far below, in the places where roots met rock, a whisper slithered through the soil, patient as poison. The 2 trees still shone, the Valar still sang, and Melker still waited. Far to the east, where the land still remembered the echoes of the music, a new rhythm stirred. Not in the grand halls of Valinor, not in the shadowed pits of Melker's domain, but in a quiet glade beside a lake that mirrored Varda's stars like scattered silver. There, beneath the unblinking gaze of the heavens, the first elves opened their eyes. They did not wake with cries or confusion, but with a quiet wonder, as if stepping into a dream they'd always known. The air tasted of dew and distant melodies, the grass beneath their fingers cool and alive. They had no names yet, no language, no fear, only the stars above and the whisper of the wind through the reeds, as if the world itself were sighing at last. The Valar, though leagues away, felt the shift in the fabric of Arda like a chord struck deep in their souls. Manwë, standing atop Tanaquetil, let the wind carry the news to his ears. New voices, fragile yet bright, humming beneath the trees. Yavanna, tending the saplings of Valinor, paused as the earth trembled with a joy she hadn't planted. Even Ulmo, in his deepest halls, heard the ripple of their awakening in the tides. But with joy came unease, for Melker, too, had felt it. His grip tightened on the iron of his throne. Eru's children, he mused, born into a world I shaped. The thought coiled around him, equal parts bitterness and hunger. In Valinor, the debate began not with shouts, but with weighted silences. Orome, the hunter, who had roamed the wilds of Middle-earth longer than any, argued first. They are defenseless, he urged, his voice rough with urgency. Melkor will twist them as he twisted the earth itself. But Mandos, keeper of the dead, shook his head. To intervene is to chain them to our will. Are they not meant to be free? The tension hung thick as mist. Varda's fingers brushed the marble table between them, her stars glinting in her eyes. They are starlight and shadow both, she murmured. To shield them completely would be to deny them their own song, and so the choice loomed, heavy as the first thundercloud of a storm. Bring the elves to Valinor, where the light of the trees could nurture them, or leave them to Middle-earth, to its beauty and its wounds, to the destiny Eru had woven for them. The decision would ripple across ages, bending the path of kingdoms yet unbuilt, of wars yet unfought. For in the east, the elves had begun to speak. Their first words were not of fear or dominion, but of the stars above them, the water lapping at their feet, the faint, far-off echo of a music they could not name but knew in their bones. They were children of the world, yes, but also of the void, the light, the dissonance, and the harmony. And somewhere in the shadows, Melker smiled. The invitation came not as a command, but as a whisper on the wind, a melody woven through the rustling leaves, the sigh of the tides, the distant glow on the western horizon. The Valar, hearts heavy with the memory of shattered lamps and scorched earth, could not bear to leave Eru's firstborn children to the mercy of Melkor's shadow. So they sent Orometh, the hunter, his great steed, striding across Middle-earth like a storm-given form. When he appeared before the elves, his voice was neither thunder nor decree, but a question. Will you walk with us under the light that does not fade? Some hesitated, their fingers brushing the bark of the trees they'd named, the stars they'd learned to read like stories in the sky. To leave was to abandon the first home they'd ever known, the shores where their laughter had mingled with the ripple of streams. But others, those who had glimpsed the darkness pooling at the edges of the forest, who had heard the howls of creatures with too many teeth, stepped forward. Their leader was Ingwe, his eyes alight with a curiosity as vast as the sky. "We will go," he said, and with those words the great journey began. The path was anything but straight. Mountains loomed like sleeping giants, their peaks veiled in mist, and the elves, so new to the world, so small against its scale, climbed with hands raw from the stone. Rivers wider than any they'd seen before barred their way, their currents singing of depths where even Ulmo's gaze might not reach. Yet wonders walked beside the hardships. In the valleys, they found flowers that pulsed with their own inner light, their petals unfolding only under the stars' gaze. In the high passes, they met eagles whose wings cast shadows like fleeting clouds, and the great birds, as if sensing their purpose, sometimes carried the weary on their backs. But the wilds held more than beauty. In the tangled forests of the east, shadows moved without wind, and whispers slithered through the underbrush, voices that mimicked the elves' own tongues, twisting their words into lies. "Why trust the Valar?" the darkness murmured. "They who fled when Melkor struck, they will cage you in their light, make pets of you." Some elves turned back then, their hearts too wedded to the familiar to risk the unknown. Others pressed on, their resolve hardening like steel in flame. The sea was the final test. None of the elves had seen water so vast, so hungry, its waves roaring like a beast denied. Círdan, who would one day master shipbuilding, could only stare in awe at the horizon, where sky and water blurred into eternity. But Ulmo, ever watchful, sent an island adrift on the tides, a living thing of roots and earth, its back broad enough to carry them across. As they stepped onto its shores, the land itself began to move, bearing them westward like a mother cradling her children. Behind them, the elves who remained watched the travelers fade into the distance. Their reasons were as varied as the stars: love of the land, distrust of gods, or simply the quiet certainty that their song belonged to Middle-earth. They would become the Avari, the unwilling, their fates tangled with the earth's wild heart. But those who journeyed, they would soon learn that Valinor's light was not a cage, but a crucible, and the choices made there would ripple back, in time, to the shores they'd left behind. The wind carried their voices still, a hymn woven into the waves, as the sea swallowed the last traces of their footsteps. The air in Valinor had been sweet with the scent of laurelin's blossoms, the light of the two trees painting the marble towers in hues of gold and silver, until the day the whispers began. They slithered through the ranks of the elves like mist through a cracked door, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Why should the Valar demand your presence? The voices murmured, smooth as oil. What do they fear, that they cannot leave you to walk your own path? The words coiled around the hearts of the Teleri, the Noldor, even the Vanyar, their melody just dissonant enough to unsettle. Melkor had chosen his moment with care. The elves, weary from their journey, stood at the very threshold of paradise, close enough to see the glow of the trees beyond the mountains. But doubt, once planted, grows roots deeper than truth. Some among them proud, fiery Fëanor chief, among them clenched their fists at the thought of being led like children to a gilded cage. Others, like gentle Elwë, hesitated, their gazes drifting back toward the eastern stars they'd once called home. The Valar, sensing the shift too late, sent their emissaries to soothe the unrest. But explanations now sounded like excuses. Promises rang hollow. Then came the final stroke of Melkor's malice. He did not roar, did not rage. He simply appeared among them, cloaked not in shadow, but in a guise of wounded sincerity. His voice, when he spoke, was laced with sorrow. I too once sang beside the Valar, he sighed, until they cast me out for daring to question. Look at their perfection, does it not terrify you? A world without struggle is a world without growth. The words struck like arrows, finding their mark in hearts already aching with uncertainty. And when the Valar at last descended to confront him, their wrath only proved his point. With a laugh that cracked the air like lightning, Melkor vanished, leaving behind a people fractured by fear. Those who turned back carried more than just grief. They carried a new kind of knowing. The world was not a hymn, it was a battle, and Melkor had given them the first taste of its bitterness. As for the Valar, their silence was heavier than any storm. They had let the serpent into the garden, and now the poison was seeping into the soil. Somewhere beyond the mountains, in the ruins of the north, a shadow stretched its wings, savoring the first true victory in its long, long war. The elves would remember this day, and so, alas, would the world. The hour of Melkor's triumph came cloaked in silence, not the hush of reverence, but the stillness of a predator coiled to strike. He had learned patience in the long ages of exile, studying the rhythms of Valinor, the wax and wane of the tree's light, the complacency of the Valar, the way even the mightiest grow careless when bathed in unbroken radiance. And so he whispered to the darkest hunger he knew, Ungoliant, a creature spun from the void's own greed, her form a tangle of night-given flesh. Feast, he promised her, on light older than the stars. The attack began not with fire or steel, but with venom. Ungoliant's fangs, sharper than shattered glass, pierced the bark of Tolkien first. The tree shuddered, its silver leaves curling inward as if to shield their glow, but the poison spread like ink in water. Laurelin's golden boughs were next, her blossoms blackening mid-bloom, their luminous nectar turning to acrid sludge. The trees did not die quickly. They dimmed, their light leaching away drop by precious drop, until Valinor's skies hung heavy with shadows no star could pierce. The Valar, sensing the wrongness too late, rushed to the grove only to stagger back, their hands pressed to their faces as if the darkness itself were a blade. Man, whose winds, usually so sure, now faltered, carrying not the scent of blossoms but the reek of spoiled nectar. Yavanna collapsed beside Tolkirien's roots, her fingers digging into soil that no longer answered her song. Even Tolkas, whose rage had once shaken mountains, stood motionless, his fists clenched around emptiness. The paralysis of gods is a terrible thing, not for its violence, but for its silence. For the first time since the music's first note, The Valar had no answer, but Fëanor did. Where others saw ruin, he saw theft. The light of the trees belonged not just to the Valar, but to his people, to the hands that had shaped it into jewels brighter than the sun. The Silmarils, clasped now at his throat, pulsed as if in sympathy, their captured radiance undimmed by the gloom. His father's blood still stained the stones of Tirion, spilled by Melkor's lies, by the Valar's hesitation. No more, standing before the gathered Noldor, his voice did not shake, it burned. "You mourn the trees," he cried, "then follow me into the darkness and take back what was stolen." If the Valar will not act, let it be said that the Elves did. The oath he swore then was no pretty promise. It was a shackle of fire, binding not just his own soul, but those of his sons, their voices rising in a chorus that made the very air vibrate with peril. They would chase Melkor to the ends of the earth. They would carve their vengeance into the bones of the world, and should any Valar, elf, or mortal dare to withhold the Silmarils from them, they would tear heaven and earth apart to reclaim them. High on the slopes of Tanaquedel, Arda heard the vow echo, and the stars themselves seemed to flinch. Some oaths are too heavy for the world to bear. This one would drown kingdoms in its wake. The forge fires of Fëanor burned hotter than any flame in Valinor, fed not just by heat, but by obsession. Day and night, his hands moved with precision no other craftsman could match, shaping not metal or glass, but light itself, the last living essence of the two trees. 3 jewels took form under his touch, each a vessel of impossible purity. The Silmarils were more than gems. They were frozen hymns, their cores pulsing with the mingled radiance of Tulperion's silver and Laurelin's gold. To gaze into their depths was to see the world as it might have been unbroken, undimmed. Even the Valar caught their breath when Fëanor unveiled them, their glow casting away the shadows of doubt that had crept into the undying lands. Melkor watched from the edges of the light, his hunger a living thing. He had craved dominion over fire and stone, over wind and wave. But this was beyond even his reach. The Silmarils were not merely beautiful, they were righteous, their light rejecting his touch like a blade turned against its wielder. That refusal festered in him, twisting into something darker than wrath. If he could not possess them, he would ensure no one could, and so the whispers began again, slithering through the courts of the Noldor like smoke under a door. Why does Fëanor hoard the light? The voices murmured. Should such gifts not belong to all? The lie found fertile ground. Suspicion bloomed among the elves, their glances at Fëanor growing edged with envy. Even his half-brothers, once loyal, began to question until the night Melkor's deception ripened into violence. Finwë, Fëanor's father and High King of the Noldor, fell defending the vault where the Silmarils lay, his blood staining the marble steps. The theft was swift, brutal, the jewels vanishing into the night like stolen stars. When Fëanor found his father's body, his cry tore through the silence of Valinor, a sound so raw it seemed to crack the very air. Grief is a fire that either consumes or forges. Fëanor burned with both. Standing before the gathered Noldor, his voice did not plead. It commanded, "Hear now the oath of Fëanor." He roared, his hand clutching a blade drawn across his palm, blood mingling with the flickering torchlight. Neither law, nor love, nor league of swords, nor dread of doom shall defend those who withhold these jewels from us. His sons echoed the vow, their voices weaving a chain around their souls that no power in Arda could break. The words were more than a promise. They were a curse, binding their fate to the Silmarils with threads of unyielding steel. The Valar, when they heard, recoiled. Mandos himself, keeper of prophecy, spoke the doom that would follow. The blood of kin shall stain your hands. Your deeds shall haunt the long memory of the world. But Fëanor was beyond warnings. The oath had been sworn. The Noldor would march, not as supplicants, not as exiles, but as conquerors. They would cross the grinding ice of the Helcaraxë. They would shed the blood of their own kin at Alqualondë. They would wage war against the darkness itself. And all the while, the Silmarils would burn in Melkor's crown, their light a mockery of all they had lost. Yet here is the cruelest twist of all. The oath was never truly about the jewels. It was about the moment Fëanor looked into their light and saw not just beauty, but his own reflection, flawless, furious, and utterly unforgiving. The Silmarils were his masterpiece, yes. But the oath, that was his epitaph. The shores of Valinor had never known such fury. Fëanor's voice cut through the salt-laced wind like a blade, his words igniting the hearts of the Noldor with a fire even the Valar could not quench. Why linger in this gilded prison? He demanded, his gaze sweeping over the assembled elves, their faces pale in the fading light of the trees. Our birthright was stolen, our king slain, and yet the Valar bid us wait. No, the darkness in Middle-earth is of their making, let it be of their undoing. His hand tightened around the hilt of his sword, the metal singing as he drew it, its edge catching the last glimmer of Laurelin's dying glow. The oath had been sworn. There would be no turning back. They left in the hour when neither tree shone, when the world hung suspended between light and shadow. The Noldor's footsteps carved wounds into the pearl-white sands of Alqualondë, their march a drumbeat of defiance. The Teleri, who had once welcomed them with songs, now barred the way to their slender ships, their hands raised not in malice but in sorrow. These vessels are not meant for war, their lord pleaded, his voice trembling. They are born of starlight and tide. Do not stain them with blood. Fëanor's answer was a flicker of steel in the half-light. What followed was no battle, but a butchery. Elven hands, trained to craft beauty, now wielded blades against kin. The sea turned crimson, its waves lapping at the hulls of stolen ships, like a wounded beast licking its gashes. The first to fall was a Teleri musician, his harp shattered beside him, its strings humming a final, discordant note. The Noldor, their faces streaked with salt and blood, boarded the ships in silence, their victory ashen on their tongues. Even the wind seemed to recoil, carrying the echoes of the kinslaying westward to the ears of the Valar, where Manwë stood atop Tenochtitl, his wings limp with grief. The sea, once their ally, became their tormentor. Ulmo, wrathful in his sorrow, stirred the waves into mountains, their peaks swallowing ships whole. The Noldor, crammed onto the decks like cattle, clung to the rails as the tempest roared around them. Lightning split the sky, illuminating faces gaunt with hunger and doubt. Some whispered that this was the doom of Mandos, made manifest, that the Valar's curse would drown them before they ever glimpsed Middle-earth. Fëanor, lashed to the mast, laughed into the storm. Let them try, he spat. No wave can quench our fire, yet fire, untamed, consumes even its master. When at last the survivors staggered onto the icy wastes of the Helcaraxë, the land itself seemed to reject them. Glaciers groaned like living things, their fissures yawning open to swallow the unwary. The cold was a blade, peeling flesh from bone, and the stars above Varda's own handiwork offered no comfort, their light as distant as the Valor's mercy. Children born in the warmth of Valinor, now withered in their mother's arms, their last breaths curling into the endless night. Fëanor's sons, their pride hardened into something brittle, pressed onward, their father's oath a chain around their hearts. Back in Valinor, the Valar gathered in the ruined grove of the trees, their hands stained not with blood, but with an action. Yavanna knelt beside Tulpirian's blackened stump, her tears pooling in its roots. "We could have stopped them," she whispered. Nienna, ever the mourner, shook her head. "No, some threads must unravel before they can be rewoven." High above, Varda's stars flickered, a silent witness to the exodus, to the long road of sorrow the Noldor had chosen. And far ahead, beyond the grinding ice, the smoke of Morgoth's forges stained the horizon, a smudge of defiance against the dawn they would never see. The oath had been sworn, the ships were burned behind them. There was no path left but forward into the teeth of the storm, into the jaws of the wolf, into the legend that would etch their names not in gold, but in blood and shadow. The first fires of the War of the Jewels did not blaze on a battlefield, but in the hearts of the Noldor as they crossed the Helcarax as grinding ice. Their breath hung frozen in the air, their fingers numb around sword hilts, yet their resolve burned hotter than the forges of Angband. When at last they staggered onto the shores of Middle-earth, the land itself seemed to recoil. Ash stained the wind, and the rivers ran gray with the filth of Morgoth's industry. Fëanor, gaunt as a wraith but eyes alight with feverish purpose, raised his sword before the host. "This is not exile," he snarled. "This is reckoning." And reckoning came swift as a storm. The Noldor fell upon Morgoth's forces like a wildfire through dry grass. At Dagger Nuin-Goliath, the battle under the stars, Fëanor's fury carved a path so deep into the enemy ranks that even the orcs, bred for cruelty, fled before him. His sword sang with a light of its own, each stroke a promise of vengeance for his father's murder. But Morgoth had planned for this. From the gates of Angband poured Balrogs, creatures of shadow and flame, their whips cracking like thunder. Fëanor fought alone, surrounded, his armor searing his flesh as their fire lashed him. He did not fall quickly. He fell brilliantly, his last stand etching his name into the night with strokes of defiance. His sons bore his body away, still smoldering, while above them, the stars Varda had kindled seemed to dim in mourning. The war did not end with Fëanor's death. It twisted into something darker. His sons, bound by the oath that had become their inheritance, turned their grief into a weapon. Kingdoms rose like fortresses of hope. Gondolin, hidden in the encircling mountains, Nargothrond, its halls carved beneath the river's song, Doriath, where Elu Thingol ruled with a queen who had seen the light of the trees. For a time, it seemed the elves might yet strangle the shadow, but Morgoth was patient. He watched, he learned, and he let the poison of the oath do its work. Betrayal slithered into the cracks between brothers. The Silmarils, gleaming in Morgoth's iron crown, became a sickness in the hearts of Fëanor's sons. When Beren and Luthien stole a single jewel from Angband's depths, it was not Morgoth who hunted them, it was elves. Kin turned on kin at the havens of Sirion, blades flashing not against orcs, but against the refugees of Doriath, desperate hands clutching children as the waters ran red. The oath, once sworn in righteous fury, had become a noose, and through it all, Morgoth laughed. Not the roar of a conqueror, but the low, ceaseless chuckle of a spider in its web. Every fallen kingdom, every broken alliance, was another thread woven into his design. The elves had crossed ice and blood for vengeance, only to find that the greatest enemy was not the darkness before them, but the darkness they carried within. The War of the Jewels would stretch across centuries, its battles etched into the land itself, but the true tragedy was not in the swords or the sieges. It was in the moment a son of Fëanor looked upon his cousin's face and saw not an ally, but a thief. The light of the Silmarils was pure, the hands that sought them. They were something else entirely. Beren was not meant to be a hero, a mortal man, scarred by loss. He wandered the forests of Doriath like a ghost, until the moment he heard Luthien singing. Her voice was not just melody, but memory of the trees' light before their fall, of a world unbroken. To hear it was to remember hope, and for a daughter of Thingol, the mightiest elven king east of the sea, to love a mortal. That was unthinkable, yet love cares nothing for the rules of kings or the boundaries of fate. When Beren pledged to wrest a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown, it was not for glory. It was the only gift worthy of her heart. Their quest should have been impossible. Angban's gates were guarded by wolves whose breath was poison, by Balrogs who had felled Fëanor himself. But Luthien, whose power lay not in steel but in song, wove a spell so potent, even the stones of Tall and Gorhoth trembled. Together, they slipped through shadows deeper than night, past armies of orcs, who never thought to look for light in the shape of a bat and a wolf. When they stood at last before Morgoth's throne, the Dark Lord himself laughed until Luthien sang. Her voice unstitched the very air, unraveling his malice like thread from a loom. Morgoth, who had shrugged off the wrath of gods, slumped into enchanted sleep, his crown slipping from his brow. The Silmaril burned in Beren's hand, pure as dawn after a storm. Yet here's the cruel twist of fate. Their triumph was never meant to last. Though they escaped Angban's horrors, though they carved the jewel from Morgoth's crown with Beren's own dagger, the Oath of Fëanor coiled around their happiness like a serpent. Even as they returned to Doriath, even as Luthien's father at last accepted their love, the sons of Fëanor sharpened their swords. A Silmaril had been freed, and blood would flow before it found rest. But in the end, their story was never about the jewel. It was about the quiet moments, Beren's callous fingers brushing Luthien's as they hid in the hollow of a tree, the way she laughed when he tried to mimic her elvish rhymes. When Mandos, the keeper of the dead, was moved by Luthien's grief to grant them a second life, it was not as kings or legends, but as mortals living, loving, and fading together like the last notes of a song. The world would remember their courage, but those who truly understood, they remembered the love that made even the gods weep. Yet Morgoth, nursing his stolen crown, learned a lesson that day. The greatest threats are not armies or blades, but hope that refuses to die. For every Silmaril he clutched, there would always be a Beren. For every shadow he cast, there would always be a Luthien, dancing just beyond his grasp. The skies above Angban split like a rotten fruit, revealing not the familiar stars, but the wrath of the Valar made manifest. The earth trembled as Tulkas the Valiant descended first, his laughter a thunderclap that shattered Morgoth's towers before his fists even struck. Behind him came Man, Wes Winds, scouring the land clean of shadow, while almost tidal waves swallowed entire legions of orcs, their screams silenced beneath the roar of purging waters. This was no battle, it was an unraveling. Morgoth, who had once twisted the music itself, now staggered beneath a chorus he could not corrupt. His dragons, bred for terror, fell like scorched leaves from the sky, their wings torn by the talons of Thorondor's eagles. His Balrogs, lords of flame, drowned in the tears Nienna had shed for ages uncounted. Yet darkness does not surrender gently. As the Valar pressed forward, Morgoth unleashed his last, most desperate weapon, the very earth beneath them. With a howl that echoed the void's emptiness, he tore the land asunder. Mountains crumbled into valleys, rivers reversed their courses, and the once glorious plains of Beleriand groaned under the strain. The sea, no longer content with its shores, rushed inward like a starving beast, swallowing forests, cities, and the blood-soaked fields where elves and men had fought for centuries. The Silmarils, those cursed jewels of light, were torn from Morgoth's crown, one vanishing into the abyss of the ocean, another buried beneath the roots of a drowning world. But the third found its way into hands both weary and worthy. Eärendil, half-elven and wholly broken by loss, raised the jewel like a beacon aboard his ship Vingalot. His wife Elwing, who had leapt into the waves rather than surrender the Silmaril to kin-slaying hands, now stood beside him, her wings of white gulls catching the wind as they soared beyond the ruined sky. The Valar, seeing this last spark of defiance, set them among the stars, a light no shadow could extinguish. Morgoth, chained with the very metals he had corrupted, was hurled through the door of night into the void, his scream fading into the nothingness he had coveted. Yet victory tasted of ash and salt. Beleriand, the land of 1,000 songs, was gone, its memory preserved only in the laments of those who survived. The Silmarils, forged to hold light eternal, were now scattered beyond reach, one in the deep, one in the dark, and one shining above as both warning and hope. And Morgoth's malice, it did not perish with him. It lingered in the envy of Fëanor's sons, in the whispers of Sauron slinking eastward, in the hearts of men who would later kneel to darker powers. The world was broken, yes, but from its cracks rose the Second Age, and with it the stubborn, starlit promise that not all lights had gone out. The war was over, but the world would never be the same. Beleriand lay drowned beneath the waves, its once mighty forests and glittering cities now swallowed by the sea, its songs preserved only in the laments of those who had loved it. Yet from the wreckage rose something unexpected, not just ruin, but renewal. The surviving elves, weary and diminished, turned their faces westward, drawn by the call of the undying lands. But others stayed, their roots too deep in Middle-earth soil to be torn away. And then there were the men, the newcomers, who had fought beside the elves in the final days, and now inherited a world still scarred by shadow. The music of the Ainur still echoed, though its melody had changed. No longer the flawless harmony of the first dawn, nor the cacophony of Morgoth's rebellion, but something quieter, subtler, a song of resilience. The light of the Silmarils was gone, yes, but in its place flickered new sparks. The courage of Beren and Luthien's love, the steadfastness of Gil-galad's rule, the quiet wisdom of Círdan's shipyards, where vessels were built not for war, but for journeys yet untold. Even the stars above seemed brighter now, as if Varda had polished them in mourning for all that had been lost. And what of Morgoth's legacy? His chains held fast in the void, but his shadow lingered. Sauron, his most cunning servant, had slipped away, his whispers already poisoning the hearts of men in the east. The Oath of Fëanor's sons festered like an unhealed wound, their descendants still clutching the remnants of a dream that had turned to ash. Yet for all the darkness that remained, there was this truth, brighter than any jewel. The world was alive. Rivers carved new paths through the broken land. Seeds took root in soil once blackened by dragon fire, and in the halls of the dwarves, deep beneath the mountains, hammers struck anvils with rhythms older than sorrow. Eru's design endured, though frayed at the edges. The story of Arda was never meant to be one of unbroken light, but of choices of harmony wrested from discord, of hope kindled in defiance of despair. So as the Second Age dawned, the elves sang fewer songs of glory and more of memory. The men, wide-eyed and unburdened by the past, reached for tools instead of swords, building kingdoms that would one day rise and fall like waves. And somewhere, beyond the edge of all maps, Ulmo's voice still murmured in the deep, a reminder that no shadow lasts forever. The music played on, and those who listened closely could hear it, not in the crash of thunder or the roar of armies, but in the rustle of leaves, the laughter of children, the whisper of the wind through the ruins of towers that had once touched the sky. The tale was far from over. It had only just begun.